Landlord denies black family a rental, but is shocked when he learns the real story. Welcome, everyone. Today, I have a heartwarming story that takes us on a journey of unexpected transformation. Join me as we dive into the life of a man who, driven by success, discovers the deeper joys of connection, kindness, and forgiveness, finding fulfillment in ways he never imagined. Let's begin. Mr. Anderson sat alone in his office, a high-backed leather chair supporting him as he gazed out over the quiet neighborhood he had helped build. From the large windows, he could see rows of immaculate houses, their lawns neatly manicured and driveways free of clutter. The sight filled him with a familiar sense of pride. He had dedicated his life to building this exclusive community, where every detail was curated to perfection. A faint smile played on his lips as he turned back to his desk, fingers tracing over a polished wooden frame that held photographs of his most prized properties. Each image was a reminder of his hard work, each house a testament to his unwavering commitment to excellence. For Mr. Anderson, it wasn't just about bricks and mortar, it was about creating a standard. Over the years, he had implemented strict rental policies, handpicking tenants whom he believed would respect and maintain his vision for the community. In his mind, these rules were essential to preserving the quality of life for everyone who lived there. But those standards came at a cost, and as he sat sorting through the latest batch of rental applications, his face tightened with a frown. One application in particular caught his eye, and he hesitated, narrowing his gaze on the family's details before moving the form to the side with a firm shake of his head. In the Anderson household, rules and boundaries were as deeply ingrained as the woodwork in his home. His son, Evan, had grown up under the influence of these principles. As a young man, Evan had recently started his career at Regal Motors, a renowned luxury car company in town. Evan was driven, yet he valued independence and had chosen to build his own career without relying on his father's name or connections. In many ways, he was different from Mr. Anderson, open-minded and thoughtful, seeing value in people and experiences beyond their outward appearances. While Mr. Anderson clung to his ideals of exclusivity, Evan thrived on relationships, camaraderie, and the idea that everyone had something meaningful to contribute. His new job had introduced him to diverse perspectives, and he appreciated the values instilled by his employers, Michael and Sarah Johnson, who owned Regal Motors. They were warm, grounded people who treated every employee with respect, fostering a positive, family-like environment. It was a world apart from the cool, calculated approach of Mr. Anderson, and Evan found himself captivated by their approach. One evening, Evan joined his parents for dinner, eager to share stories of his new experiences. He spoke animatedly about the Johnsons, describing how Michael and Sarah led by example, prioritizing values like kindness, integrity, and community over profit alone. His enthusiasm was genuine, but as he spoke, he noticed his father's expression change, his smile fading, his posture stiffening. Mr. Anderson put down his fork and listened in silence, his face inscrutable. Evan could sense a tension in the air, a curiosity piqued, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what had unsettled his father. The conversation shifted, and Mr. Anderson asked more about Evan's work, his voice tinged with a mixture of interest and something else Evan couldn't name. He described the Johnsons' company as if it were another world, one where success was defined not by luxury, but by connection, empathy, and a shared commitment to the common good. To Evan, it was inspiring, yet to Mr. Anderson, the world his son described seemed foreign, even a little unsettling. As Evan continued, he casually mentioned how Michael and Sarah Johnson had built their own home on the outskirts of town. They had chosen the location for its peaceful setting and modest surroundings, a testament to their belief in living simply and meaningfully. Unaware of the connection, Evan spoke about the Johnsons' four sons, each with unique dreams and ambitions, and how their parents nurtured these goals with patience and encouragement. Mr. Anderson listened intently, his fork halfway to his mouth, the realization slowly dawning on him. Could it be the same Johnsons? the ones he had declined as tenants not long ago. He felt a pang of something unfamiliar, a sense of discomfort creeping into his chest as Evan continued. That night, Mr. Anderson lay awake, replaying his son's words and recalling the image of the smiling family in the application he had so quickly dismissed. An unexpected thought stirred within him, challenging the very ideals he had built his life upon. The next morning, Mr. Anderson's thoughts were still clouded as he walked through his property office. Normally, he took comfort in the surroundings, the framed awards on the walls, and the quiet luxury of the decor he had curated over the years. But today, a strange restlessness unsettled him. He couldn't forget Evan's enthusiasm from the night before, his admiration for the Johnsons, a family Mr. Anderson realized he had likely overlooked. Evan was close with Michael and Sarah Johnson, his new employers, and it was clear he respected them deeply. He spoke of their warmth, their down-to-earth approach, and their genuine interest in others. That morning, over coffee, Mr. Anderson tried to dismiss his lingering doubts, rationalizing his earlier decisions as necessary for maintaining his standards. But the Johnsons' image, of a family quietly dedicated to values he often overlooked, remained with him. Later that day, a particular scene replayed in Mr. Anderson's mind. It was the afternoon he had skimmed through the Johnsons' rental application. He remembered their glowing references, the consistent record as reliable tenants, and a financial stability that matched his requirements. Yet something in him had hesitated. Now, as he looked back on it, he felt a pang of regret. He had rejected them almost as if on instinct, never once questioning his initial response. Evan, unaware of his father's turmoil, seemed lighter than ever these days. His eyes sparkled as he shared anecdotes from Regal Motors, where every day felt like more than just a job. Michael and Sarah Johnson believed in fostering relationships among their employees, encouraging teamwork and open communication. They took genuine interest in everyone, from interns to executives. The environment, Evan said, felt like a family, with Michael and Sarah personally knowing each staff member, making sure everyone felt respected and valued. Their approach was so far removed from the rigid professionalism Mr. Anderson had always enforced. At lunch that day, Evan and his father found themselves in the same cafe near the property office. Mr. Anderson, who had been quiet all morning, suddenly felt the need to speak. As they sat by the window, watching people pass by, he cleared his throat, his gaze unfocused. "Evan," he began, carefully choosing his words. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about your work, the people you work with. Michael and Sarah Johnson, they sound like good people." Evan's face lit up with a smile. "They really are, Dad. They're honestly two of the kindest people I've met. It's not just how they treat their employees, but the values they teach their kids, too. I mean, their boys are young, but they've already got big dreams. Ethan, the oldest, wants to go into medicine. He says he wants to help people who can't afford health care. Then there's Noah, who's all about designing eco-friendly buildings. Jacob, the quieter one, wants to write stories that bring people together. And Caleb, the youngest, talks about becoming a teacher." Mr. Anderson felt something shift as he listened. These were not dreams born from luxury or comfort, but aspirations rooted in a sense of purpose, a commitment to helping others, a drive to make a difference. It was clear that the Johnsons had not only instilled values in their children, but had led by example, showing them that true fulfillment lay in caring for those around them. Lost in thought, Mr. Anderson barely noticed the people bustling around them. He thought of the paths he had taken in life, paths marked by the pursuit of wealth and status. The Johnsons, on the other hand, seemed to be treading a different course, one focused on love, integrity, and the simple joys of family life. Maybe there's something to be learned from people like that. Mr. Anderson murmured aloud, almost to himself. Evan nodded, his gaze softening. "There is, Dad. It's not just about money or success. They live their values. I think it's the kind of life that changes people." As Evan's words settled, Mr. Anderson felt an unfamiliar ache, a longing he couldn't quite define. For the first time in years, He questioned if his focus on exclusivity and appearances had left him blind to what truly mattered. There was a part of him that yearned to experience what Evan saw in the Johnsons, a life where community and compassion outweighed material gain. As the days passed, Mr. Anderson couldn't shake the quiet discomfort that had settled within him. His thoughts returned, again and again, to the Johnson family, their modest home, and the vibrant lives his son, Evan, had described. The Johnsons' values echoed back to him like a persistent melody, one he couldn't ignore. One evening, as Mr. Anderson prepared to leave his office, he glanced through the window and noticed a group of boys down the street. They were helping an elderly woman carry bags up her front steps, each boy's face alive with laughter and ease. As they passed into the light, Mr. Anderson recognized two of the boys from the family photo attached to the Johnsons' rental application. Could they be the Johnson boys? He wondered. He watched, transfixed, as they continued to help their neighbor. Every action graceful and natural, showing a kindness that came from within. Later, Mr. Anderson mentioned the encounter to Evan, describing the boy's small act of service with a hint of amazement in his voice. Evan smiled, seemingly unsurprised. "That sounds just like Ethan and Noah," he said. "Michael and Sarah are always encouraging them to be kind to others, to help out when they can. They don't just talk about these things, they live them." "Dad." This comment struck Mr. Anderson deeply, though he said nothing in response. In his world, actions were often calculated for effect or status. But here was a family whose actions flowed naturally from a place of sincerity. It was unsettling and humbling to realize how starkly their approach differed from his own. The following Saturday, while out on errands, Mr. Anderson's attention was again drawn to the Johnson boys. This time, he spotted Jacob and Caleb in the local park, picking up litter scattered along the walking paths. The two younger boys worked with a cheerful enthusiasm, occasionally racing each other to fill their trash bags. As they moved along, more children joined in, turning their task into a group effort. Mr. Anderson, who had stopped to watch from a distance, felt a twinge of admiration. There was something magnetic about the boys' kindness, something that drew others in and inspired them to do good. As he continued on his way, he found himself thinking about how Michael and Sarah had fostered this sense of responsibility and compassion in their children. He had spent a lifetime prioritizing success and exclusivity, building walls to protect his achievements. But here was a family that thrived by sharing, connecting, and giving back. Their lives were woven into the fabric of the community, making it richer and more vibrant in ways Mr. Anderson hadn't fully grasped until now. That evening, Mr. Anderson sat alone in his study, his mind alive with memories of what he had seen. For years, he had taken pride in creating an elite neighborhood, one that shielded his investments from the disruptions he so often imagined. He had justified these choices, told himself that he was protecting the integrity of his properties. But now, his assumptions began to unravel. For the first time, Mr. Anderson allowed himself to question the judgments he had made. He realized that by setting such strict boundaries around his properties, he had inadvertently closed himself off from experiencing the depth of human connection, the sense of purpose, and the joy of belonging that he saw reflected in the Johnsons and their boys. He thought back to the Johnsons' application, the family photo that had accompanied it, the hopeful faces looking back at him. A quiet pang of regret washed over him, one that went deeper than he was prepared to admit. He had denied a good family, a family filled with love and kindness, simply because he was more concerned with protecting his vision than embracing possibility. Evan's words, spoken with such clarity and admiration, replayed in his mind. It's the kind of life that changes people. Those words carried weight now, taking on a meaning he hadn't seen before. The life Evan admired wasn't shaped by wealth or prestige, but by something far more enduring. It was shaped by kindness, by the willingness to look beyond oneself, to lift others up. In that moment, Mr. Anderson felt a rare sense of vulnerability. He wondered what it would be like to open his heart to that kind of life, to let go of his rigid control and embrace a world where compassion and forgiveness were guiding lights. And for the first time, He found himself hoping he would get the chance to do just that. As Mr. Anderson reflected on these new perspectives, he became increasingly drawn to the Johnsons' way of life. Their values, so different from his own, seemed to echo with a sense of purpose and connection that he hadn't experienced before. He felt an unshakable need to know more about them, to understand how they had managed to create such a warm, supportive family while running a successful business. One evening, he approached Evan with a hesitant curiosity, masking his growing respect with casual questions. "So, these Johnsons, they seem very grounded. You've told me so much about them, yet I feel like I barely know them." Evan's face brightened, sensing his father's genuine interest. "You'd really like them, Dad. They're the kind of people who make everyone feel welcome. You know, they actually invited me to dinner at their place this Friday. Why don't you and Mom join us?" Mr. Anderson hesitated. The invitation felt intimidating, almost too personal, but he could see the hope in Evan's eyes. And for reasons he couldn't fully explain, he felt an urge to accept. "All right," he said quietly. "If they're open to it, I'd like to meet them." Friday evening arrived, and Mr. Anderson felt a strange mix of apprehension and anticipation as he and his wife, Helen, made their way to the Johnsons' home. Evan had given them the address, and as they approached, Mr. Anderson was struck by the simplicity of the house. It was modest, cozy, and undeniably welcoming, a stark contrast to the grand homes he had surrounded himself with over the years. When they knocked, Michael Johnson opened the door with a warm smile, his eyes shining with kindness. "Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, welcome. It's a pleasure to finally meet you both." His handshake was firm but gentle, and Mr. Anderson felt his usual formality slip away as he returned the greeting. Inside, the Johnson home radiated warmth. The walls were decorated with family photos, art projects, and memories that spoke to a life well lived. The aroma of a hearty meal filled the air, and as Sarah welcomed them, Mr. Anderson felt an unexpected ease settle over him. She led them into the dining room, where their four boys waited with polite smiles and curious glances. "Thank you for having us," Helen said, clearly charmed by the Johnsons' hospitality. Mr. Anderson nodded in agreement, feeling a rare humility wash over him. Throughout the meal, he watched the Johnson family closely, marveling at the way they interacted. Michael and Sarah took genuine interest in each of their boys, encouraging them to share their thoughts, dreams, and even their worries. Ethan, the eldest, spoke about his desire to help others through medicine, while Noah explained his vision of designing homes that would be environmentally friendly. Jacob, a budding writer, shared a story he had been working on, and Caleb, the youngest, spoke eagerly about his hopes of becoming a teacher someday. As Mr. Anderson listened, he was moved by the depth of their ambitions. Each dream built not on competition, but on a desire to make a difference. The love that flowed through their words, the encouragement Michael and Sarah offered, left Mr. Anderson feeling like an outsider who had, for the first time, glimpsed a world more meaningful than he had known. After dinner, as they moved into the cozy living room for coffee, Michael and Sarah continued to share stories about their lives and the values they hope to pass on to their children. "We believe in showing our boys that success is about more than achievements," Michael said thoughtfully, glancing at his wife. "It's about how you live, how you treat others, and how you give back." Mr. Anderson nodded, feeling a newfound respect growing within him. "That's admirable," he said quietly. "I've always focused on building, on maintaining standards, but I can see there's more to it. Your family seems to have found a balance I can't say I understand, but deeply admire." Sarah smiled warmly, her voice gentle. "It's not always easy, but we've learned that love and kindness have a way of growing if you let them in. They're what make life truly full." As the evening drew to a close, Mr. Anderson found himself reluctant to leave. He felt as though he had stepped into a rare space, a world where empathy, encouragement, and forgiveness created a richness money couldn't buy. And as he thanked the Johnsons for their hospitality, he sensed a quiet shift within himself, a recognition that his life, so long focused on exclusivity, might just find new purpose if he opened himself to these values. Walking to the car, Mr. Anderson turned to Helen and spoke with a softness she hadn't heard before. "They're remarkable, aren't they?" The next day, as Mr. Anderson went about his usual routine, he found himself distracted, replaying moments from the evening with the Johnsons. Their home, so unpretentious yet full of life, lingered in his thoughts like a melody. He had felt something there he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of genuine warmth, a feeling of connection that didn't rely on wealth or appearance. For the first time in a long while, he wondered if he had been measuring success all wrong. Later that afternoon, as he returned from a meeting, Mr. Anderson noticed a commotion at the end of his street. Mrs. Jensen, an elderly neighbor, was struggling to carry bags of groceries up her driveway. As he slowed down to watch, two familiar figures appeared beside her. It was Ethan and Noah Johnson. They approached Mrs. Jensen with bright smiles, each taking a few bags from her with an ease that made the older woman break into a grateful laugh. Mr. Anderson watched from a distance, observing how the boys helped Mrs. Jensen all the way to her front door, staying long enough to chat and ensure she didn't need further assistance. Their actions, so simple yet sincere, left him feeling unexpectedly moved. In a world where small gestures often go unnoticed, here were two young people offering help without any expectation of reward. The scene stayed with him, reinforcing the values he had glimpsed in the Johnson family's home. That evening, Mr. Anderson couldn't resist mentioning what he had seen to Evan. They were sitting in the kitchen, the soft evening light filtering in through the window. "Your friends, the Johnson boys," he began, choosing his words carefully. "I saw them helping Mrs. Jensen with her groceries today. It was unexpected." Evan nodded, a gentle smile forming. "That's just how they are. Dad, Michael, and Sarah have always taught them to look out for others, to make a difference in small ways. To them, it's a natural part of life." Mr. Anderson fell silent, reflecting on how differently he had approached his own life. While he had focused on building boundaries, on protecting his investments and status, the Johnsons seemed to thrive by giving, by making themselves available to others. He wondered what it would be like to live that way, to find fulfillment in kindness and connection rather than control and exclusivity. As the days passed, Mr. Anderson found himself observing the Johnson family more closely, each interaction revealing something he hadn't understood before. One afternoon, he watched as Jacob and Caleb, the younger boys, organized a small group of children at the neighborhood park to help pick up litter. The boys worked with contagious enthusiasm, turning the task into a game, cheering and laughing with each piece they collected. As Mr. Anderson watched, he noticed other children, inspired by the Johnsons' example, joining in, their laughter filling the park with a sense of shared purpose. It was a simple act, but the impact was profound. For years, Mr. Anderson had sought to protect his community from anything he deemed undesirable, creating a sense of exclusivity he had equated with value. Yet here were the Johnsons, enriching the neighborhood in a different way, making it a place where people felt connected and engaged, where even small acts could spark change. One evening, as he sat on his front porch, he spotted the entire Johnson family walking down the street together, their laughter carrying on the breeze. They stopped to chat with neighbors, to help a passerby with a flat tire, to offer small gestures that seemed to make the world around them brighter. In those moments, Mr. Anderson felt a longing he couldn't ignore, a desire to be part of that lightness, that openness that brought people together rather than kept them apart. As he watched them disappear down the street, a pang of remorse settled over him. How different things might have been if he had welcomed the Johnsons from the beginning, if he had opened his heart instead of letting his judgments shape his actions. He realized now that he had been so focused on protecting what he thought mattered that he had missed the chance to experience what truly did. That night, as he lay awake, Mr. Anderson felt something shift within him, a resolve, fragile but real, to change. He was no longer certain of his path, no longer sure of the beliefs he had clung to for so long. But he knew one thing: he wanted to live with more kindness, to embrace the values he had seen in the Johnsons. It was a humbling thought, Yet it filled him with a quiet hope, a sense that perhaps it wasn't too late to choose a different way forward. Over the following week, Mr. Anderson couldn't escape the pull of reflection. Everywhere he turned, he found small reminders of the Johnson family and the goodness they brought to the community. It was as though he had gained new eyes, ones that revealed a side of life he had never considered, a life where success was measured not by what one had built alone, but by the impact one had on others. One evening, as he sat down to dinner with Evan and Helen, Mr. Anderson cleared his throat. His voice was soft, almost tentative. As he spoke, "Evan," he began, "I wanted to thank you for introducing me to the Johnsons. I don't think I've ever met a family like theirs. There's something inspiring about the way they live." Evan smiled, nodding in agreement. "They're remarkable, Dad. I feel lucky to know them." He paused, studying his father's expression. "They've changed how I think about a lot of things too." Mr. Anderson's gaze dropped to his hands. He felt a wave of gratitude toward Evan for opening his world in ways he hadn't expected. He wanted to express his appreciation, but found himself struggling to put the right words together. For so long, he had been sure of his beliefs, convinced that he knew what was best. But now, he realized there was a different kind of wisdom, a softer, more compassionate one, that he had overlooked. "Tell me more about them," he said finally, his tone earnest. How do they make everything feel so real, so meaningful?" Evan leaned forward, his face thoughtful. "I think it's because they live without walls. They don't see people as categories. They see them as individuals. They teach their kids to embrace life with open hearts, to find joy in small acts of kindness." He paused, glancing at his father. "For them, love isn't something reserved for family alone. It's something they try to share with everyone they meet." As Evan spoke, Mr. Anderson felt a pang of humility. His whole life, he had built metaphorical walls around himself and his achievements, seeing boundaries as essential to maintaining order and exclusivity. Yet here was a family who had opened their hearts freely, bringing light and warmth into the lives of those around them. The realization left him feeling exposed, as if he were only now understanding how narrow his world had become. A few days later, Evan invited his parents to a community event hosted by Regal Motors, the Johnson's company. The event was being held at a local community center and was open to employees, their families, and members of the public. Michael and Sarah had planned it as a way to bring people together, celebrating the diversity and unity that made their company unique. When Mr. Anderson and Helen arrived, the center was filled with laughter and warmth. Tables were set with foods from different cultures. Children darted around with face paint, and groups of people gathered, talking animatedly. The Johnsons had organized activities for everyone: games, workshops, and even a small talent show where employees' children could showcase their skills. Mr. Anderson found himself standing at the edge of the room, watching as Michael and Sarah moved through the crowd. They greeted everyone warmly, remembering names, asking about families, and offering genuine encouragement to all. It was clear that they were deeply respected, not because of their status, but because of the kindness they exuded. Suddenly, Michael spotted Mr. Anderson and made his way over, a broad smile on his face. "Mr. Anderson, I'm glad you could make it," he said warmly, shaking his hand. "Thank you for inviting us." Mr. Anderson replied, surprised by the comfort he felt in Michael's presence. This is wonderful. I've never seen a company host something quite like this." Michael chuckled, his eyes crinkling with humor. "We believe in creating a family here, one that includes everyone, not just our employees. It's about bringing people together, giving back, and making life a little better for those around us." As they continued talking, Mr. Anderson felt a deep respect growing within him. Michael's words, simple yet profound, resonated with something he had been longing for. He realized now that his own achievements, though impressive, had often come at the cost of connection. He had built structures and enforced boundaries, but he had never created a space that made people feel like they belonged. By the end of the evening, Mr. Anderson found himself talking to Sarah as well. She was gracious and warm, sharing stories about their early days building the company. the challenges they have faced, and the joy they found in working together as a family. Her words left a lasting impression on him, a quiet reminder that life's true richness lay in relationships, not walls. Driving home that night, Mr. Anderson felt a shift within him, a realization that perhaps he could make changes in his own life to bring some of the light he had witnessed into his own world. It wasn't too late, he thought, to start choosing a path that valued openness and kindness, a path that allowed him to give as much as he had gained. In the days following the community event, Mr. Anderson felt the impact of his encounter with the Johnsons more deeply than he'd expected. Their kindness and authenticity, the way they brought people together, and the warmth they radiated, it all felt like a revelation, something he had been missing without even realizing it. He found himself replaying his conversations with Michael and Sarah, each word reminding him of values he had never truly embraced. One evening, as he sat alone in his study, Mr. Anderson realized he no longer found comfort in the symbols of his success, the framed certificates, the leather-bound portfolios, the gleaming awards on the shelves. They felt hollow, disconnected from the new understanding that had taken root within him. Slowly, he ran his hand over the surface of his desk, feeling the polished wood beneath his fingers, and thought about what it meant to truly build something meaningful, not just buildings and properties, but connections, memories, a legacy of compassion. A soft knock on the door broke his reverie, and he looked up to see Evan standing in the doorway, a curious look on his face. "Dad, are you all right?" Evan asked, stepping into the room. Mr. Anderson managed a small smile. "I'm fine, Evan. Just thinking." He hesitated, unsure how to explain the shift that had begun within him. "I've been reflecting on a lot of things lately, about what it means to be successful, to live a life worth admiring. Meeting the Johnsons, your friends, they've opened my eyes to something I didn't see before." Evan's expression softened, and he sat down beside his father, a gentle understanding in his gaze. "I understand, Dad. They have a way of doing that to people. They remind you that life is about more than accomplishments." Mr. Anderson nodded, feeling the truth of his son's words. "Evan, I want to be different. I want to do more than just preserve my properties or build a perfect community. I want to be part of something meaningful, something that brings people together rather than keeps them apart." Evan smiled, his pride for his father evident. "That's a wonderful thing, Dad. I think you're already on the right path." Encouraged by Evan's words, Mr. Anderson began to explore ways he could make a genuine difference in his community. He started by reaching out to neighbors, organizing small gatherings and informal meetings to get to know the people around him. It was new territory for him, and he felt awkward at first, unsure how to connect with those he had always kept at a polite distance. But he remembered the warmth he had seen in the Johnsons, the way they welcomed everyone into their lives, and he pushed through his discomfort. One Sunday, he invited Mrs. Jensen, the elderly neighbor he had seen the Johnson boys helping, over for tea. She accepted with surprise, and as they sat on his front porch, she shared stories of her life, her family, and her memories of the neighborhood from decades past. Mr. Anderson listened, genuinely moved by her tales, realizing how little he had known about those around him. For so long, he had seen his neighbors merely as occupants, never as individuals with rich lives and stories of their own. As he continued to reach out, he found that his connections with people began to deepen. He organized small charity events, inviting families from all walks of life, creating spaces where they could meet, talk, and share in the joy of being together. It was a humbling experience, one that left him feeling more fulfilled than he ever had before. One afternoon, as he was setting up tables for a neighborhood potluck, he spotted Michael Johnson walking over with a friendly wave. "Need a hand, Mr. Anderson?" he called, a warm smile on his face. Mr. Anderson felt a sense of gratitude swell within him. "Please, call me John," he replied, reaching out to shake Michael's hand. "And yes, I could use the help." The two men worked side by side, arranging chairs, setting out plates, and preparing for the gathering. They chatted easily, sharing stories, laughing, and finding common ground that felt natural and unforced. For the first time, Mr. Anderson felt what it meant to truly collaborate, to share in the work with someone who understood the joy of building connections. As neighbors arrived and laughter filled the air, Mr. Anderson stood back, watching the scene with a profound sense of fulfillment. He realized he had been given a gift, a second chance to see life with a fresh perspective, to build relationships that truly mattered. Turning to Michael, he said quietly, "Thank you for everything. You've shown me something I didn't know I was missing." Michael smiled, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We all have moments of growth, John. What matters is that we learn from them and move forward. You're doing that, and it's making a difference." In that moment, Mr. Anderson knew he had found something more valuable than any possession he'd ever owned, a purpose rooted in empathy, kindness, and a desire to bring people together. And he knew that his life would never be the same again. As the days turned into weeks, Mr. Anderson's journey of transformation continued. He found himself increasingly dedicated to this new path, one that involved not just personal change, but tangible efforts to make a difference in his community. Each day, he reached out in ways he never would have considered before, offering help, lending a listening ear, and working to foster an environment that welcomed everyone. His heart felt lighter with each step, and for the first time, he sensed a growing purpose in his life that went beyond material success. One morning, as Mr. Anderson was preparing for a community meeting, Evan stopped by his office, a smile of admiration on his face. "Dad, I don't think I've ever seen you like this," he said, glancing at the various flyers and notes his father had prepared for upcoming neighborhood events. "It's inspiring to see how much you're doing for others." Mr. Anderson looked up, a warm smile spreading across his face. "It's strange, Evan. For so many years, I thought I was creating something valuable with all these properties, maintaining a certain standard. But now it's as if I finally understand what value truly is." He paused, reflecting on the newfound joy he had discovered in connecting with people. "It's not about the properties, it's about the people, the lives we touch. That's where real meaning lies." Evan nodded, his pride for his father unmistakable. "I couldn't agree more, Dad, and I'm proud of you for realizing that." With Evan's encouragement, Mr. Anderson began working closely with the community center, organizing events that brought people together in new ways. He found himself volunteering regularly, taking part in food drives, and even helping to coordinate after-school programs for local children. The work was hands-on, sometimes challenging, but it filled him with a satisfaction he had never felt in all his years as a property owner. One afternoon, as he was setting up for a job fair at the community center, he was joined by Michael Johnson, who had become a steady presence in his life. Together, they arranged tables, set up information packets, and welcomed job seekers, their camaraderie growing stronger with each shared task. Mr. Anderson marveled at how natural it felt to work alongside Michael, who approached every task with a humility and warmth that had clearly influenced Mr. Anderson's own transformation. At the end of the event, as they packed up, Mr. Anderson turned to Michael, his voice filled with gratitude. "You know, I don't think I would have come this far if it weren't for your family. Meeting all of you has changed my life in ways I couldn't have imagined." Michael's gaze softened, and he placed a reassuring hand on Mr. Anderson's shoulder. "John, you had this kindness in you all along. Sometimes it just takes the right moments, the right people, to bring it out." Those words stayed with Mr. Anderson, encouraging him as he continued to explore this new path. Over the next few months, he noticed the impact his efforts were having, not just on the community, but within himself. He felt a lightness, a peace he hadn't known before, and he found joy in the simplest of moments. Conversations with neighbors, the laughter of children at the community center, and the shared work of organizing events brought him a fulfillment that his former life had never given him. One evening, as he and Helen prepared to attend a community potluck organized by the Johnsons, Mr. Anderson took a moment to reflect on how far he had come. "I never thought I'd enjoy this kind of life, Helen," he admitted, glancing at his wife with a quiet smile. For years, I chased success, believing that status and exclusivity would bring me happiness. But now, I see things differently. It's these moments, these connections, that give life real meaning. Helen looked at him with pride, her eyes soft with understanding. I'm so glad you found this. John, I can see the change in you, and it's a beautiful thing. At the potluck, Mr. Anderson felt fully at ease, moving through the crowd and striking up conversations with ease. He laughed with neighbors, listened to their stories, and took a genuine interest in their lives. When he spotted the Johnson boys helping to serve food and clear tables, he felt a surge of admiration, knowing that these young boys were being raised with the values he had only recently come to understand. At one point, he found himself seated beside Michael and Sarah, the three of them watching the lively gathering with quiet appreciation. Sarah smiled, glancing over at Mr. Anderson. It's wonderful to see how much everyone has come together. And, John, it's been inspiring to see how much you've embraced this community. Mr. Anderson nodded, his voice soft with sincerity. I owe so much to you both. You've shown me that there's a greater purpose, one that brings people together rather than keeps them apart. As the evening drew to a close, Mr. Anderson felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The journey he had embarked on, though unexpected, had given him more than he had ever dreamed. And as he looked around, surrounded by friends, laughter, and love, he knew he had found something far richer than anything he could have built alone. As Mr. Anderson settled into this new chapter of his life, he found that the simplicity and authenticity of his daily interactions filled him with a kind of contentment he hadn't known before. Every morning, he would stop by the community center, greeting familiar faces and lending a hand wherever he was needed. It was a far cry from the polished world of his office, but he felt more at home here than he ever had, surrounded by his awards and certificates. One brisk autumn afternoon, as he arrived at the community center, he spotted the Johnson boys playing in the garden area with a group of local children. Ethan, the eldest, was showing the younger kids how to plant seedlings, his gentle patience evident in every gesture. Jacob and Caleb were gathering the little ones together, explaining the importance of taking care of the plants. The sight warmed Mr. Anderson's heart, and he paused, appreciating the purity of their efforts. He joined the boys, crouching down beside them as they carefully placed seeds in the soil. You're doing a wonderful job here, he told them, smiling as he watched their hands work diligently. This garden is going to be something special. Ethan looked up, a modest smile spreading across his face. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. My parents always say that it's the little things we do for others that make a big difference. Mr. Anderson felt a pang of admiration, struck by the wisdom that seemed to radiate from such young souls. Here were children already making a positive impact, learning values he had only recently begun to embrace. Watching them, he felt both humbled and inspired, a reminder of how much he had yet to learn from those around him. As he continued working with them, the kids began chatting animatedly about their dreams. Ethan spoke about his goal of becoming a doctor, wanting to help those who couldn't afford medical care. Noah described his aspirations to design homes that would be accessible and environmentally friendly. Even young Caleb chimed in, saying he hoped to be a teacher one day so he could share knowledge with others. Listening to them, Mr. Anderson felt a stirring of pride. These children were not only dreaming big, but were grounded in a sense of purpose that went beyond personal ambition. They were driven by a desire to serve others, and he realized that this was largely thanks to Michael and Sarah's guidance. The Johnsons had taught their boys that success was not just about achieving one's own goals, but about uplifting others in the process. Later that afternoon, Michael joined Mr. Anderson in the garden, and the two men stood side by side, admiring the kids' work. Your boys are remarkable, Mr. Anderson said, his voice filled with genuine respect. They have such big hearts. It's clear that you and Sarah have instilled something special in them. Michael's face softened, a proud smile gracing his lips. Thank you, John. Sarah and I try to teach them that the most important things in life are love, kindness, and integrity. We want them to understand that real success comes from making a difference, however small, in the lives of others. Mr. Anderson nodded, feeling the truth of those words settled deeply within him. It was a lesson he wished he had understood earlier in life, but he was grateful to be learning it now. "I have to admit," he began, his voice tinged with humility, "meeting your family has changed me. I used to think that my purpose was to build and protect, to hold myself and my work to high standards. But now I see that life is about more than boundaries and achievements. It's about reaching out, about creating something meaningful together." Michael placed a reassuring hand on Mr. Anderson's shoulder. "It's never too late, John. Every day gives us a new chance to make a difference." Those words lingered in Mr. Anderson's mind as he left the community center that evening. He thought about the years he had spent focused on himself, on his success, and on maintaining a certain image. The realization that he could now use his influence to foster unity and kindness filled him with a quiet determination. The next day, he arranged a meeting with his staff and proposed a new initiative, a program that would support community projects, fund local events, and provide resources for families in need. His team was surprised and used to this new direction, but they saw the sincerity in his eyes, the passion he now carried. He explained that he wanted his properties to be more than just places to live. He wanted them to be places that foster connection, compassion, and a sense of belonging. As he spoke, Mr. Anderson felt a surge of energy, a purpose more meaningful than any goal he had ever set. He was no longer just a landlord, but a part of something larger, a movement toward a community bound by kindness and understanding. And as he looked out at his team, he felt the weight of his past lifting, replaced by a new vision, one rooted in empathy, forgiveness, and a desire to give back. It was a beginning, a small step in the right direction, but he knew in his heart that this journey was just getting started. As Mr. Anderson's new initiatives took shape, he began to notice a remarkable shift in his relationships and the atmosphere around his properties. His staff, initially cautious about the changes, soon embraced his vision, inspired by his dedication to creating a welcoming and supportive community. Tenants who had once seen him as a distant figure now approached him with ideas, concerns, and hopes for their shared spaces, making him feel more connected to the people he served than ever before. One crisp morning, as he walked through the neighborhood, he paused to take in the quiet, simple beauty around him. The laughter of children echoed from a nearby playground, and he waved to a group of young families gathered at a community garden that had recently been planted through his new program. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment that went beyond any material achievement, and he knew he was finally on the right path. Later that day, Mr. Anderson received a message from Michael inviting him to a community gathering that evening. It was a modest event to celebrate the recent efforts to improve the local area and to recognize those who had helped bring people together. Mr. Anderson accepted the invitation with gratitude, looking forward to spending time with the Johnsons and the many other families who had become such an important part of his life. That evening, as he arrived at the gathering, he was greeted with warm smiles and genuine handshakes. The air was filled with laughter, and the scent of home-cooked meals wafted through the open space. Long tables were set up with plates of food contributed by families from all walks of life, each dish representing a piece of the community's shared culture and stories. As he made his way through the crowd, he found himself chatting with neighbors, listening to their stories, and learning more about their dreams and aspirations. He felt humbled and grateful to be welcomed into their lives, no longer just as a landlord, but as a friend, a partner, someone who had come to value them beyond any superficial measure of success. At one point, he noticed Sarah Johnson talking with a group of children, their eyes bright with excitement as she explained a project they could take part in at the community center. Mr. Anderson watched as she spoke with warmth and patience, her words filled with encouragement. Her ability to inspire others, especially the youngest members of the community, moved him deeply. Soon, Michael joined him, a glass of sparkling water in hand, and the two men stood together, watching the lively scene unfold around them. "You've become an important part of this community, John," Michael said quietly. "We're all grateful for the kindness and dedication you've shown." Mr. Anderson turned to him, a soft smile on his face. "Thank you, Michael. I never expected that making these changes would bring me so much joy. I feel like I've found something that I was searching for, without even knowing I needed it." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's amazing, isn't it? The power of connection, of opening up to others. It changes everything." As the evening continued, Mr. Anderson found himself drawn into a conversation with Helen and Sarah, who were sharing memories of their own community events from years past. He listened intently, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging, of being part of something that transcended his individual journey. At one point, young Caleb tugged on his sleeve, his small hand holding a piece of paper. "Mr. Anderson," he said, his voice full of excitement, "we made this thank you card for you." He handed over a brightly colored card covered in cheerful drawings and signatures from the neighborhood kids. Mr. Anderson's eyes softened as he read their words of gratitude. Each message, each drawing, was a testament to the community he had helped to create, a reflection of the love and friendship that had grown within these shared spaces. He felt a lump form in his throat, deeply moved by their simple yet heartfelt gesture. "Thank you, Caleb," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. "This means more to me than you know." Caleb beamed up at him, and Mr. Anderson felt the weight of his past mistakes lifting further, replaced by a new lightness, a peace that came from knowing he had finally found a way to make a true difference. As the evening drew to a close, Mr. Anderson found a quiet moment to reflect. He stood under the stars, feeling the gentle hum of the community around him. It was a far cry from the isolated life he had once led, driven by goals that now seemed shallow in comparison. He had discovered that true success lay not in exclusivity or ambition, but in the simple act of opening one's heart. Looking around at the faces of his new friends, he realized that he had been given a second chance, an opportunity to reshape his life and his legacy in ways he had never imagined. And as he turned to join the others, he knew with certainty that he would carry this newfound purpose forward, creating a life defined not by what he had achieved alone, but by the connections he had nurtured, the kindness he had shared, and the forgiveness that had brought him to this very moment. Thank you for joining me on this journey of transformation, love, and forgiveness. I hope this story touched your heart as much as it did mine, reminding us all of the incredible power of empathy and connection. Let's carry forward the message that true fulfillment comes from the kindness we give and the lives we uplift. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for being here.